Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Let's try this again.
Let's try this again.
So, ladies, looking up on Google,
Google.
I'll just type this into the message
Instead,
instead. Just checking that any electronics aren't on, or say like Bluetooth, anything, microphones, other speakers. Everything of mine is turned on. Is there anything around your that might be interfering with it? Or no? Or no? Yeah.
No, not mine.
Yeah. I have no idea about this one. Okay. Sorry, Mark, it's still happening.
All right.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm sorry, you guys. I'm not quite sure. I'll proceed with this. It's going to drive everyone nuts. Don't ask me anything with this breather. Are you? And I know that you've taken. Time to come on board today. So my apologies. What would you like to do? I can try my best to do it. Work. What do you think?
Give it a go.
Is it just that?
Give it a go.
Yeah, give it a go. Let's see what we can do.
Okay. So basically, I'll chat. And then I'll leave the floor open for you guys to ask questions, rather than it being super interactive. You guys can take a little bit of that's okay. And what I'll do is I'll answer first, since you guys are on the screen. So, I got yours first regarding osteoporosis and your. Oh yes, mute. I can get you guys to mute. Absolutely. So yeah, if you go on mute, I still think it happens when you do it. Yeah. How's that? Oh, wonderful. Here we go. So that's what's going to happen. We can do this. Thank you, guys. So yeah, I'll chat, and then when you're ready to chat, just take your microphone, go off mute, and then we'll do it like that. It'll just be a little bit slower. So my apologies for that. All right. So I hope you guys are all well, and thank you for joining. So Karen, first of all, I will chat with you about what you mentioned, which was your client with osteoporosis. And you had mentioned that she has fractured her back. And as a result, actually, Karen, if you don't mind muting, is that okay? Thanks, thank you. It seems to be with that, thanks. So she's fractured her back, and as a result cannot lay flat on her back at the moment, and she's been coming to a yin yoga class, which is great that she's doing something. That's a win. And her doctor has advised her that this is good for her to practice. He said, you're no expert in this disease, but you've read up on it and feel a little bit out of your comfort zone. And fair enough, it can be a little bit scary when you're dealing with, someone who's come in saying they've fractured their back and is also unable to lie on their back. That seems pretty debilitating. And then you're now in a position to try and move them. Do you know, well, just before I ask you about her, you also asked me about being a little bit unsure if something happens to her injury-wise, what happens to you as a teacher if you're covered. Do you guys in the UK have public indemnity insurance as yoga teachers? Thumbs up if you do. Thumbs down. Yes, you do. Karen, have you got it? So that you should be covered, right? So given you're not saying, I'll go into some contraindications for it, but you're not putting in it's too much of a compromising position, which I'm sure you wouldn't. You'd be fine. That is what that cover is for, right? You've got a certain duty of care, but if you're not there pushing her into a position when that happens, which I'm sure you wouldn't be, that might be sort of litigated maybe. But if you're just cueing something and it's up to her to move into it or go a little bit deeper, then I trust and I believe that you're covered by that. So that's okay. Yep. And you can always have the discussion with her of move into it like you've been doing, just breathe, move into it, move into your own depth. The interesting thing with osteoporosis is quite often as teachers, we're a bit too afraid to work with them, to move them, right? And the current guidelines, we've got Judy coming in. The current guidelines are actually to do moderate intensity weight-bearing exercise and some high impact exercise. And you wouldn't think that with our osteoporosis clients, right? You'd think possibly not loading, right? Taking the stress off their joints, but it's actually the opposite. They've kind of got there in whether they've not been loading their joints, and that's the osteoporosis as a result of that, or maybe it's genetic, but they actually need to be loading their joints. So my suggestion, Karen, is to also, I don't know whether you teach other forms of yoga, is to try and get your client to do, for her health and her bone density, to help with bone density, hatha poses, things that are easy to hold, like, warrior lunges, goddess pose, planks, things that she can, that can actually build strength and add a little bit of resistance to her practice. The yin is fantastic. The yin is absolutely fantastic because I do believe it's going to be tapping into her parasympathetic nervous system, allowing her to relax. Sounds like you're doing a great job, and she enjoys being there. So that's fantastic. That's brilliant that she's there. The contraindications are no loaded, twisting, flexing. First of all, hi Judith, who's coming in. We're just talking about osteoporosis. So the contraindications, and these are the main guidelines set by, I don't know whether you guys have this book at all. It might be back to front, but this is the guidelines for exercise testing and prescription. Looks like a really dull, boring book, but it is literally the one thing that you do want to own, which covers many pathologies, many injuries, and what to do with it, all the way up to cancer. And so what they suggest is, like I mentioned, moderate intensity to weight-bearing exercises, a little bit of impact, and to not go so much into loaded flexion and twisting, right? So if you think about some of that might be in a yin pose where you might be twisting in the spine, draping yourself over a bolster. That could be maybe for a long period of time. We know yin, you literally marinate in a pose, right? Your body is in there for a while. Maybe staying in it for too long or too much of duration, and that position might be compromising. So as have a chat to her as well, and just give her some options. If you're going into, say, the deer pose with a twist, maybe she does a pigeon pose where she can keep her spine, like to stretch the glutes. A half pigeon pose where she's leaning forward, getting a stretch, but not on the actual. Just thinking about that's when I used to teach in these sort of things where sometimes it's like that, and then there's a bit of a twist. That might, because of the duration of the pose, not feel great. And I think you guys all probably have been in yin when the teacher says, "Oh, start to come out of the pose." It's like, what? How? You feel a little bit stuck because you've been in there for a long time. So figuring out ways where she maybe also has props around her where it's an easy getting out of, right? But yeah, just think to yourself, if you can keep her back, I don't want to say relatively neutral so she gets no movement, but a gentle recline with her back to get some gentle extension over a bolster, that should be fine. Cat stretch is fine, right? Even an easy, yeah, for sure, because you still want to encourage movement. Even an easy twist, it's not that much load from here, right? Or in your yoga poses in hatha, that's not as much load as this, which is, you can feel the forces kind of bear down. So that's a twist on my back, can sometimes be put into flexion. Just thinking, how does that feel in your body? Does that feel like a bit more of an impacting loading? Give her some space. But yeah, you can do some gentle movement, but loaded flexion, forward folds and twisting, and those two combined, maybe not those ones. Everything else she should be good. Depends on her pain. And like you said, I think it was great, telling her don't push past into areas of that may exacerbate pain or cause pain. Just back it off. Just her to be able to manage that. In addition to the hatha, which hopefully starts to strengthen. Don't be shy about putting her, maybe trialing out kneeling planks, and tell her that this is what is the guidelines for osteoporosis. So you can win her over with that, hopefully, because it might be a bit daunting to start with. So those are my recommendations. I leave the non-reverb floor to you, Karen, if you want to mute yourself and have any questions behind that.
No, that sounds great. That it's basically what I'm doing anyway. It's just she's very nervous when we come to anything to do with the spine. I think she's had something a little bit more going on with the spine. What she's not told me what a friend has, where she fell off her mast on a yacht onto her back. But she's not told me that, and I'm just a bit nervous because of her injury, what she hasn't told me about. So, no, that sounds good. I'm basically teaching a pose to the class and then going to her individually. It's quite time consuming, but I go to her individually and then I spend a little bit of time asking her how she feels. I go into the pose if it makes her feel okay. I just wanted a verification really that she was good to come to the class.
She is, yeah, definitely. She is, definitely. Again,
Brilliant.
yeah, for sure. Better for her to come to the class than to not come to the class. And it sounds like she's enjoying it, you know, also probably being around people and they're relaxing. So yeah, she's in a safe place. She's safe with you. And I don't think you could, you know, just encourage her to do a bit more. And she's okay, if she's okay to do that. Yeah. Awesome. And please share anything else if you want to. Good. Sorry, Karen.
No, that's fine. You've answered all my questions, Stella. I think I don't think I have any more on that particular subject.
Okay.
It's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just mute you again. So Judith, I know you're not you're muted. We have a bit of a problem with some reverb coming from my end and I can't quite figure it out. So everyone's being muted as I speak, and then if you want to speak, just unmute yourself and jump on in. So I'll answer, of course, the questions of those who are here, and then I'll go through the other questions of the people that asked me in the Facebook group. So Jody, you were talking about pigeon for your larger ladies. Yep. Have you started teaching them already? Yeah. And may I ask, how's it been going and what you've come up against already, like what issues you found or cues you found haven't worked or feedback that they have given?
Nothing really. It was more that everything's going really well. They're enjoying it, but when I looked over, they're not like getting into the pose as like the rest of the class. And I didn't really know what cues to use to get them there, really. You know, like they were kind of restricted. They seemed a lot more restricted, and they didn't complain or anything. They were happy to be where they were, but I just wondered if there was something that I could tell them to make them feel a little bit more at ease with it.
Yeah, okay. And that's a really good thing to bring up as well. So obviously for our larger bodied clients, how to give cues without calling that out as well. And like you mentioned, if they're happy and they're fine in it, even though it doesn't look the same representation of what everyone else is doing, they're probably having a great time. Or, you know, if you can have a great time in half pigeon, that is, but they might be experiencing something within and it just looks completely foreign to us, right? Because they are dealing with a little bit more body mass, you know, especially through and around in the belly. But that's not to mean that they're not feeling it. But you could give cues, like you could, if you want them to, you know, and this is also, by the way, going to, Adine had a question about the angle of the knee joint. Does it always have to be at 90 degrees? And we know, and you guys would know as teachers, not everyone can bring that leg out, that knee out to a 90-degree angle. But if you've got props, Jody, then that might be helpful as well. Props like bolsters. This is the world's biggest bolster, by the way. So maybe you want to give them a sense of getting a little bit more space so they're lifted up on a, sorry, a little bit better that way.
lift it up on a bolster this way, right? And this is for a Dean as well, and just to play around with the angle. So when they come forward, maybe tipping forward like that allows for a little bit more of the body mass to come forward. Maybe that doesn't work for them and it's still better down here. Or if everyone is flopping down, right, and they're actually physically limited by that, that's okay. They can still get a wonderful stretch for the hip. And I would put it out to the whole group rather than specifically pinpointing, right? You could be like, oh, hey guys, so you're in your half pigeon. If you want to, get a little bit juicier or want to feel it, grab your blocks, prop yourself up, depending on where you want to be, lift yourself up, play with your pelvis or the hip pulling forward or backwards, find what works for you and make it an active pose, right? So maybe it might feel quite nice to be here, pushing into the floor with the legs. Then they're not as constricted as much, and they're going to be working a little bit in the hip tissue because I'm asking to push downwards. And then when it comes to slowly moving forward rather than feeling restricted, I'm feeling a deep stretch in my hip. Not as much here because I'm a bit more passive, if that makes sense. So the blocks and props, you can use them as a tool rather than it being a tool for the larger body client, for everybody, right? Use it as like, now we're going to do pigeon quite active today, pushing the front leg down into the floor, pushing the back leg down, pushing into the blocks, lengthening the spine, holding that, incrementally going a bit further, just cueing from rather than belly, cueing from pushing into the floor and becoming longer. And that's taken any awareness up, whether they might feel inhibited here. And usually that's the way I work around it. So they don't have to come down here to fully be in half pigeon to get the benefits. That is much more of a stretch on my gluteal region of my posterior hip than actually that is. And that's the same with the Dean's question with pigeon being at 90 degrees. You guys can see that my left hip's pretty tight. So if I try and get my left knee in 90 degrees, there's no way in hell that butt cheek's getting on the floor. It's just a nugget right now. Like it's not going to get there. So maybe I use a block and still work with the 90-degree angle. That helps. Maybe I use a bolster to still work with the 90-degree angle. I like working with it as close to a 90-degree angle as possible and working the thigh inwards in half pigeon, because when you adduct and you move the thigh that way, you actually get a deeper hip stretch than if the knee is outside the line of the hip. So that is going to induce much more of a hip stretch than going outwards. But people might be here and still feel a stretch. Yeah, you just say, try and bring your leg out relatively, or your shin forward until you feel the stretch. And this is not so much for you, Jodie, but for a Dean's question. There's no rules here because we're all so different in our hips and where we're going to feel it. What I like to just focus on is the squaring of the hips and then playing around with that and then finding out what works. Our hip architecture is so different that, like with your clients and seeing them represent a different shape and a different position in half pigeon, same with everyone else as well. But I always ask the question, is this, if just let me know if you're not enjoying this or if there's acute pain, wriggle around, feel out what works for you, play with pushing, play with relaxing, leave that floor open for them to explore internally, and then leave it up to them, and it sounds like your ladies are having a great time. Sorry. Any other questions regarding that group that you're teaching? Okay. And your next one was C-sections. Yep. Given that your clients have been cleared by their doctor, right? Been cleared by everything to come back in. They're going to have a sense of probably disconnect from their core for a little while, right? It's going to feel a little bit odd down there because obviously they've had to cut through the abdominal tissues. So understanding that and also allowing them to have a bit of compassion to themselves, that it takes a little while for that to come back. It might be a little bit weird sensations, but it will eventually come back. And the first thing is them just coming in and doing exercise. with things that might, in yoga, we can tend to obviously in back bends and things, stretch the tissues, and twist, we twist, right? All that sort of stuff is great, right? It's moving the tissues into kind of end range in the belly tissues. Great stretching, you know, great contractions, twists. I love that because I think that just, it pulls every which way on the tissues and makes them more, gives them much more integrity and strength. It's just going to be, again, giving the cues or giving them that, you know, this is the movement that I want you to do. Just go to where it feels good for you to start with, and let's build on that. You'd be like, this is where I want you to twist to, but if you're twisting and it doesn't feel great, come on back, find a twist. Rather than not doing it, figure out what feels good for you. With planks, start on the knees for sure. Start on the knees, the forearms, and then just see how they're feeling. And, you know, a great way to encourage them to feel a sense of success with that is maybe just give them some homework. Say, do some side planks, do some forearm planks on your knees and time yourself. Maybe you can't do it in your group class, but tell them afterwards, hey, time yourself and build on that time each time, even if it's 1 second more. That's a really great way for them to go, oh, I can measure that as a way of getting stronger. And I think that's quite important if they're wanting to get back into it. But apart from that, I can't see any contraindications. Just, yeah, they might not have the strength to get up into boat and hold it there. So maybe bent knees or hands behind the thighs for a bit of support. Yeah. But as long as they've been cleared, they should be okay. Any questions on that, Jodie?
That's fab. Thanks so much. Thanks.
All right. Judith, you just had, welcome, my love.
Yeah.
Hi,
Sorry.
how are
Yeah. I'm not being rude by not turning my camera on, but I did try. And every time I try to turn it on, my internet goes off. So we have a bit of a weak internet where we are.
You are fine. And you know what? I don't hear the reverb. I think it's sorted. Anyway, we're going to roll with this. So that's great. So Judith, you posted, and it was just one I just saw before. Where is it? Where was it? So I've got everything written on the board here. Can you just remind me of your queries again?
Yeah, it was about the shoulders.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Shoulders are the pulling down of the shoulders, or the shoulders. Adine also had shoulders away from the ears. She had actually an opposite query. Can you just explain a little bit more? Is it the in downward dog specifically?
Yeah, well, the first thing I was thinking was the downward facing dog. When we go into downward facing dog, and we still tell people to move the shoulders away from the ears and move the shoulder blades away from each other. And I did have a lady, and I didn't even think about it until then, but like it causes like an internal rotation of the shoulders, doesn't it? When you move the shoulder blades in downward facing dog.
So what's happening with the shoulders, and this is just obviously with a bit of the biomechanics of how the shoulders work. So this is the action, obviously you're in, the upper body is like that, and downward.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
So what's happening is you're in shoulder flexion. So this is shoulder flexion. And the shoulder blades on your back, actually, when you do this, shoulder blades, if you think about them sitting like that on your back, they go into upward rotation. So they do slightly widen and they travel up and around the back. So they broaden on your back. So the arms come up, the shoulders go into flexion, and the shoulder blades as well do this on your back. So there's usually that cue of spread your shoulder blades. There's a cue of draw your shoulders away from the ears, and or draw your shoulder blades down your back. It can be really, really confusing. Like, what are we doing with these things, and what is actually happening? So the position is your arms, shoulders are in flexion, shoulder blades in upward rotation, right? And the muscle that you want to be, that takes the shoulder blades and widens them is called the serratus anterior muscle. You don't need to remember the names, but it is around here. And its job is to pull the shoulder blades and wrap them around the rib cage and stop them from winging out. You know, when you see shoulder blades that sort of ping out, the inside borders wing out, this muscle's job is to flatten it, right? And just trying to think of a downward dog. So here's my downward facing dog. I'm in shoulder flexion, but I've also got gravity pushing me down. You guys can see that, right? If I go to the side, gravity is also working to push me down. Depending on the school and the train of thought, maybe it's a passive downward facing dog, but I would rather teach everyone to do much stronger downward facing dog. If I said draw the shoulders down away from the ears, right, and shoulders down my back, what I've actually done, and I don't know whether you can see that happening, is I've inhibited. I'm pulling down instead of pushing, right? In downward dog, we want to be pushing here, arms are going up, shoulder blades are going up. It's actually okay to have the shoulders slightly elevated, that's fine. If you give the cue to draw the shoulder blades down, you're inhibiting the action of that, and that is our downward facing dog pushing into the floor. So from here, rather than I'm going to again do shoulder blades down and back, right, as opposed to pushing into the floor, and I always give the cue, push the floor front ways or push forward into the front of the mat. And rather than anatomically cueing the muscles, because no one really knows what they are or where they are, I always give the cue of hug the armpits in towards each other and imagine someone's about to jump, or an easier cue, imagine someone's about to push firmly down on your brow line, on your upper back. What would you do? And when you give cues like that, people end up finding that inner strength or resilience, and they end up finding the muscles that need to be recruited. It can actually be as simple as that. So shoulders up by the ears is actually not scrunched, right? But it's rather than here, maybe they might demonstrate like that, but that's okay, because you cue to go down, you're inhibiting the action of the shoulder blades, which in the downward facing dog, because of the force load of gravity pulling down, they actually need to be widening and going slightly up on the back to stabilize. So upward rotation like that. And when you say draw the shoulders down away from the ears, you end up doing that. And it's not as stable, but it also doesn't feel as great. I love the cue, like just imagine I'm going to come, if you're the teacher, just imagine I'm going to come around and press down on the back of your brow line quite firmly. Can you resist against me? Or, you know, if it's an in-person class and they're okay with you touching, you could probably try and gently do that. That generally sets people up for their strongest position, because internally their body is just problem solving it. It's really hard, don't you think, when you're like, okay, now widen your shoulder blades to activate your serratus anterior. Draw the shoulder blade, shoulder blade depresses down. It's all a bit too much. But I know it can be really, really confusing in downward facing dogs. So yes, to answer your question, Judith, the shoulder blades are actually widening. They're widening and slightly going up, right? They're not drawing together or going down. And to answer Adine's question, which is shoulders away from the ears, this sort of thing, which you might see in some people, and some people might be a little bit tight in the shoulders. Another great way of getting around that and asking people to find out the position that works with them is you could do drills, right? Even in Tadasana. Hug the shoulders up towards your ears, actively draw them away. These are great drills because they're scapular drills, scapula being the shoulder blades, going up, going down. I like to cue from Tadasana, hug your armpits in towards each other, squeeze the blades together, start from the back. So can you guys see my shoulder blades are drawing together and I go down, but if I go and wrap and then push, everything kind of broadens out on my back. Again, down and back, right? Not as stable as armpits hugging towards each other, pushing into the floor. And because it's a pushing up action, the shoulders are going to lift a little bit, and that's absolutely fine. So when you've got people in downward dog and half the class are nailing it, half the class look quite up in their shoulders, make it a little drill. You'll be like, hey guys, can you stay in downward dog and scrunch the shoulders to your ears and draw them away? Find a position in between that works for you, like works well for you. as I mentioned with Jodie, with the ladies presenting in pigeon pose, sometimes the sensations that they feel are fantastic, right? They're feeling great in their bodies, but our eye thinks a pose should look a certain way. And we just kind of need to let go of that a little bit. We need to let them figure out what
that's exactly what I was thinking, because when I told her to actually move the shoulder blades away from each other, she just kept bending her elbows because she said she just couldn't bear the weight. And that's what I was thinking. Our bodies are so different. So I wouldn't know what's happening in her body. And that's what stopped me for a second, because I thought, I don't know what she's feeling in her body. I can't really guide her.
It's so tricky. It's so tricky. We can definitely try, you know, but that's when it's really handy to start to have some cues in your back pocket, like I said, of what do you want to get them to do? Like, all right, guys, you're in your downward facing dog, and I want you to feel really strong and resilient. I want you to push the floor away with your arms. You know, I want you to, whether hugging the armpits in towards each other either makes sense, or just pushing your arms into the floor, pushing your feet back into the floor. And now imagine, you know, in a really kind, loving way, someone's about to jump on your back. Could you hold them in your dog? You're just trying to think of ways that they can problem solve, that a whole group can respond to that. And they're all going to respond in a different way, but they're probably going to bring into that practice their strongest downward facing dog, right? And you haven't cued anything that is serratus anterior or anything like that. It's always good to know what's happening. And I think people don't understand the biomechanics of what's happening in the shoulders, shoulder flexion, upward rotation. So I always like to have that feeling of not bearing down, but actually letting everything go up and push. And it feels a lot more stable, and especially like for longevity in the shoulders as well. It makes I feel like I enjoy the downward dogs much better. Try to find a cue for that for the whole class. And then, you know, stepping back and just observing and going, interesting. You know, like everyone's got their own thing going on, but that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yep.
And did you have another question as well?
No, it was just, but then I can take that from there. But when we're doing any arms up poses, and then again, your shoulder will, going with the law of physics.
Make it an exploration, you know, you can always bring these drills back into any pose.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I can always use that.
Squeeze together, forward squeeze together. I always like doing, you know, these ones, which is, you know, downward rotation of the blades, upward rotation, just feeling the back, you know, really wide, circles, anything that you can do, and try and, if you could weave that into the session and try to get them to do it in different positions, it's a nice exploration. And people don't really realize that we need more of this movement, because in yoga we're constantly told to pull it down, but this is an upward, this is an elevated position. So I say encourage the shoulders to go up towards the ears sometimes, for sure. Most of our life is spent down here, right? Doing all this sort of stuff, not as much up here. So I believe that's really important to actually give in your class some cues to lift up. So you might get a whole bunch of, but my neck hurts. And I'll be like, it's going to make your neck hurt less if you do more of it, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Karen, you mentioned, can I ask about hypermobility at some point? Absolutely. May I ask in which part of hypermobility? Like what's your question surrounding hypermobility?
I've just got a young girl who has severe hypermobility in her knees. So she comes to my yin class, and I don't really know much about hypermobility at all. And she loves the yin class, but I can see sometimes that she's suffering, and I don't know how to really approach the problem she's got. She doesn't say anything to me, but I can see in her face. I don't know how to approach that.
And it's yin.
She comes to me in. She's come for about a year, and she really enjoys it, but she just has a problem with her knees. She just says she's in pain when going to certain poses.
Yeah. Okay. So
So there's so much to talk about with hypermobility, right? I think that might be a whole nother another session. And it depends on, if it's, true hypermobility, what it sounds like it is. And obviously, if you are hypermobile and you go into yin poses, it's so easy just to move into those hypermobile ranges, and that's okay, right? But also you have to remember the time and the duration that she's in those poses. So for the rest of the kind of stiffer people in the class, it's like they're going through the onion layers and they're like, whew, slowly easing into their maybe a deeper found flexibility. But she's already got that. She's already probably kind of at her end ranges. So my solution is, given that it's in a specific to a yin yoga class, to try and maybe get her to play around with some activity in it, meaning rather than, I know this goes against yin, but because she is hypermobile, and it's nice to give them something to work with, right? To challenge them in some way, because they can already get to these depths that the rest of the class is striving to get to. So for instance, even like with half pigeon, right? Even if she's, do you remember, Karen, which poses she struggles with the most with the knees? Is it some or is it all? Oh, sorry, my love, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, it's predominantly to do with it's whenever we're in a knee pose, so like a pigeon, or maybe hero pose or half hero. I can see she's struggling, and I do go on chat to her and say, look, it's your body. You've got to listen to what your body's saying, and you might be doing something totally different to what anybody else is. But she still tries to go deep into that pose. It's probably her ego gets in the way, and she wants to look like everybody else, even though everyone doesn't look the same, I know. I just, it's just something that because I know we're all different and hypermobility is different within different people. I just struggle with her. I don't know how to guide her.
Yeah.
And I'd just like something to go back to and say, let's focus on this, or I mean, I've read about it, but still, that's just a reading. It's not like talking with you, who knows, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm just going to mute you. I think it might be something in your space, maybe, that's causing the reverb. Just to note. So this could be good. So yeah, sorry about that, but this is good. So okay, so to answer your question, and you'd think that hypermobile people could go into a yin class and they'll be fine, they won't feel anything, but they still feel stiff. They, it's in their tissues. They generally have a different tissue composition. How like we can be made up of collagen and elastin. It'll be slightly different for them. So they'll get all different sorts of sensations as well, including holding poses in a yin pose. Are they doing any damage to themselves by going into a yin pose? No, but I reckon it's nice to give her some options of, hey, let's try and do something different today if you're keen. Rather than just relaxing into it, can I ask you to try to activate the muscles and then relax, activate, relax, and see if that helps? So for instance, good old half pigeon, right? So you're in yin, it might be a much more, you might also have a bolster here, right? And it's a little nicer and gooey than the one I just showed you. But even then, she might be super floppy, and there might just be a lot more load going on in her knee joint, right? But she's not activating anything around it. She's not actually working any of the muscles. And I have a theory, and it's not really a theory, it's actually based on science, that loading people, increasing people's strength generally helps with the resilience around the joint. So we want to encourage that. So when I say activate in a yin pose or any kind of pose, right? It's rather than flopping down, I'm going to push into the floor. I'm stretching the hip joint. So now I want to work it in this position. So I'm going to push into the floor with my ankle, my knee, into the bolster and my hip. And I'm actually working the tissues. Yeah. And with the foot, she can be plantar flexed or dorsiflexed. It doesn't actually matter. You might not have heard a cue of flex the foot to protect the knee joint. It doesn't have any really scientific backing.
people have to play with what works best for them, just so you know, in that position. So maybe you're asking her, people are in it for, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Can you say, can you do little drills with inside your body of holding something, working it for 10 seconds, relaxing it, going deeper, holding it, pushing again, 8 to 10 seconds or longer, and then releasing again, and see what kind of response that gives her in her tissues, just to play around with something. You could just say, could you mind experimenting with something and see if this gives you a better sensation of having worked, but also resting. For the upper body, as an example, just to give you more variation for to make more sense. So whether this is something in yin, right? People might be here or here, but what if you got her to push this arm into the floor, to actually work around the back of the shoulder joint, push the shins into the floor, right? Reach the arm actively up to the ceiling. So I'm actually doing a bit of work here rather than relaxing down. That's to give you an example. Use the space. People with hypermobility generally don't have a great proprioception of where they are in space. But the great thing about yin yoga is you're pretty low to the ground and you've got a multitude of props to drape over. So you've got lots of stuff to push into and to pull against. Does that make sense, Karen? I mean, depending on what, you can always send me a list of what yin poses you might, want to do with her. But that would be my first port of call, because she obviously clearly likes it and enjoys it. And you don't want to give her something completely different or say, hey, maybe you should come into a hatha class and we work on, just building some really good strength, but she should still do it, but try that out. I find that it's hard even as a non-hypermobile person, and it works all your tissues at end ranges. So when she's flopping into her end range and putting pressure on her joints, maybe that might start to ease off for her a little bit around the knee joint. So give that a go and report back to me and see if that helps. And let me know if there's any other poses that you want to do with her and you don't quite know how to make that active, make that an active position. Is that helpful? Does that answer your question?
That's great, thank you. Yeah, and now I've connected with you. Yeah, I'll keep in touch, and yeah, she's in a class today with me, so I'll do exactly what you've said, and we'll have a chat.
Yeah,
Thank
cool. And just a note with hypermobility, it's not a bad thing to work into the ranges of hypermobility. The cues are keep your elbows soft, don't lock out the knee. There's no, I wouldn't worry about it, right? Because if you think about it, hypermobile people, if we're constantly saying don't lock the knee, how do they walk around? Like, do they walk around with a soft bend, a micro bend in their knee the entire time? That's going to be pretty awkward, right? It's like I have to just watch how they move in their everyday, watch how they put their mat down, how they walk out of the yoga studio. What you do want to do is, again, can be a really cool cue to play with the whole class is, I'm not super hypermobile, but you'd see that they're going to be pushing right back there. But maybe you work with, hey, try this pose with bent knees. The next time you do it, try it with fully engaged and locked out knees. Because there's nothing wrong with locking out. You just want to make sure that you're engaging through the muscles. Soften the knees, lock out. Soften the knees, lock out. That could also be, obviously this is not, actually what I'm talking about, so tree pose, right? Soften the knee or lock out the knee. Both are great. Both are pushing into different ranges of motion, and you want to get strong in all the ranges of motion in all the positions. So if you're only ever doing your standing balancing poses with a slight micro bend of the knee, you're going to get really strong in those positions. Does that make sense? You always get really strong micro bending the knee in that position, slightly knee flexed. But when it comes to doing like a warrior 3 with a fully locked out knee and you're not used to it, you're going to feel quite weak there because you haven't built up that tissue capacity. So it's totally fine to move in and out of the ranges. Bali, I have no walls, so it's the little children on the motorcycle. Yeah, so that's a little segue, but and also same with the micro bending of the elbows. You might find that the cue is given out, but no one's in pain if they hyperextend their elbows. It's actually fine. But playing with different positions could be a nice way to work around that for the whole class. Cool. Awesome. All right. So Mark, because you're here, did you have any questions?
Hi, yeah, I'd like to ask about heart conditions such as stents and pacemakers,
Yeah.
and kind of, is there a risk of doing things such as puppy dog pose or other heart kind of opening poses to those people that have those issues?
That, Mark, is a really, really good question, of which I actually don't have the answer to yet, but I can look into it, only because it's one that I haven't researched, and it's actually, yeah, good thing that you brought that one up, because interesting enough, puppy dog pose, stretching of the chest. I know a little bit obviously about post-operative cancer patients with stretching the tissues, but with those with stents, I actually don't know the current guidelines. So if you don't mind, I'll look through the literature in this book, which I did mention does tell you most things. It doesn't obviously specific to yoga, but it is. I'll send you guys through on the notes. It goes through everything, and it just gives you the guidelines, including for pregnancy, etc. So I'll get back to you on that one, Mark. Obviously not in this session, if that's okay, but great for bringing that one up. I'd like to give my opinion and say, yeah, sure, but you never know. There could be some contraindications there that we don't know about. Yes. All right. Okay, so before I go into some other stuff, guys, that some of the others had asked, I've just got a board here in case you're wondering if my eyes are traveling off into the distance. Anything else you guys that are on the screen would like me to go over? And have I hope, cleared up the questions that you had? All good? Awesome. Okay, brilliant. Great. Okay, so we've touched on osteoporosis, covered the pigeon. So Adine had, she also had the thing with the shoulders, which Judith had, and she also mentioned some people get cranky necks when you're doing, when you're in Warrior One and you're looking up, or you're in probably different poses such as extended side angle and looking up. Hers was more so Adine's was looking up in Warrior 3 and people getting cranky with their necks and it not being that enjoyable. I think it's quite common, of course, and if you think about it, unless maybe you're a painter, you're not going to be spending a lot of the day, long periods doing that, right? So that's probably going to be a really weak area for most of us. And for some of us, it's fine, especially if you're a bit more of a seasoned yogi who does it. But for others, it might start to fatigue quite quickly. So there are options that you can give clients for that, which means that they can still do it, right? You still want to encourage them. It's great neck extension and it's building strength on your neck extensors. And also, if you've come from a job where you're on the phone or looking at your desk, it's probably it's good to open up the tissues and the interior neck muscles as well. So my way of getting around that, or just encouraging people to stay in it rather than shying away from it. So say if you're in your yoga pose and you take your arms up, it's just they can't even get into their pose and enjoy it because it's all here. Take the hands behind the head. Sorry, guys, just excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to get these boys to stop moving their motorcycles. I'm so sorry, you guys. The trials and tribulations of living it with no walls. And these kids go up and down my driveway literally every day. And every day I come out going, please, not every day. And I was worried that this might happen, and they sure did. Anyway, I'm hoping that's okay. So back to the neck. So when you're in a warrior or a high lunge or any position and you want them to look up, rather than looking straight ahead or giving them a cue to not do it, take the hands behind the head for support. And use the hands to traction the head up. So you have a slight pulling action and you press against the back of the hands and then tilt back. Now this is going to be really passive in the neck. So the neck muscles aren't actually going to be working, but you're going to be bringing them into a nice extension range. So I always cue, push the head into the hands, push the hands into the head, and then lift up and then go back. And then you could say to your clients, okay, try and take your head away, an inch away from your hands, and hold it there just for as long as you can, and then push back up, put it back on. If you feel you can't hold it here, that's fine. Rest back again. So in that respect, if you're holding a pose or you want to give them and encourage that strength, hold, let go. See if you can hold that for 5 seconds. Pretty sure they can. Come back on again, take a couple of big deep breaths. So there's, rather than a panic that might be induced by them holding that position for a long period of time, they're like, I can do this. I can manage it. Does that make sense? They've gotten used to it and they're like, yep, that's fine. So I find that's really, really helpful. And also to encourage lots of neck strengthening exercises. So if you think about Vashisthasana, side plank, where your neck's on your head's in a lateral position. So this is challenging the muscles, the lateral muscles around the neck, which is fantastic. It's okay if some people do this, but just say in your classes, do try and bring the head forward. I say like cooking the body or the part like a human rotisserie, just making sure every part gets, stronger and stronger. They could look up. This could be a nice drill. There's nothing wrong with moving the neck within a pose. It's actually a fantastic way of neck strengthening. To regress that even further, could be, child's pose at the beginning. You get them to move and explore neck movement. So don't shy away from the neck, guys. It's really helpful to strengthen that. So that was one of Adine's questions, and her other one was, is it good or bad to engage legs in Dandasana, staff pose, if the heels lift? And this might pertain to also the hypermobile people, but also those who might have chunkier calves, right? More meat, more flesh. When you pull up on the kneecaps, and if the heels lift, you're probably just doing a really awesome job of contracting the quads and the kneecaps pull up. You're not going to be in any risk of doing anything here. And if the heels lift up, that could be that you've got more mass, more flesh here, and it just happens anyway, right? For some, they might not. I can actually get mine to lift up, but for me to do that, I'm really working strongly into my quadriceps. So in my opinion, that's a really safe, strength-based exercise. Yeah. If that doesn't feel great on the back of their knees, Adine, when you watch this, my suggestion would be to still pull up on the quads, but you could do a co-activation of the hamstrings. The quads are on the front, pulling the kneecap up, hamstrings are behind. Pulling the kneecaps up, now I'm going to push my heels down at the same time and try and pull my heels towards my butt. It's a very weird sensation. I'm working front and back, and it's a whole lot more hard work. And then my calves have lifted up as opposed to that. So to answer that question, nothing wrong with the heels lifting. That will just be dependent on the person and the shape of their legs, etc. Right, now I know you guys, I've gone over time. I'll be going over time with you, and I know, apologies for those who, we took a good 20 minutes to be able to get online together. So if you have to jump off, by all means, I won't be offended, but I'll just keep this going, obviously, for the time, for the hour, if that's okay. All right, so Natalie had queries about alignment for ankles, knees, and hips, and activity things to do in Tadasana to prepare people. And I think this is quite a big of a broader question. And also Steph asked, should people have a perfect proportion or a position in a pose? And as you guys know, we are all so different, right? So the alignment cues can vary for each person, and we need to figure out how to talk to a group with alignment, giving alignment cues that, like I mentioned before, open up an invitation for them to explore, not follow a dogmatic alignment practice. And her thing was how to activate in Tadasana to prepare for standing poses. There's stuff that you can do in Tadasana, but there's also stuff that you can do whilst in the poses. I like in Tadasana, which is a fantastic pose, there's heaps of stuff you can do with your legs to feel out what is available in the activity around the joints. For instance, Let's say starting from the feet, handkerchiefs work really well as a visual. You've got a handkerchief under each foot and you're trying to pull the handkerchiefs up. So there's this pulling action, right? Suctioning the handkerchiefs up, or trying to splay the handkerchiefs out. There's your pushing action, the broadening of the toes and the arches on the feet. So that's pulling up the handkerchiefs, splaying out. There's also, and I'm just going to go through this quickly for you, Natalie, who's not on screen, but she'll watch this, rolling around the feet, awakening the corners of your feet. This is great. Also gets people aware of their feet, and you can say moving around the bones. You could do a rolling like so, yeah, getting everything warm, ankle circles, etc., etc. This is all from like a Tadasana position. So that's your feet, and that can also be done in open kinetic chain, meaning I'm not grounded here. I'm trying to pull a handkerchief and I'm trying to push it. Pull a handkerchief, try and push it. Different positions with the foot. So you could have heaps of fun doing different things, trying to do it in this position, push, grip, push. The world is your oyster there. With the engagement of the legs, obviously you're just in a nice neutral position. Note some people might naturally stand in a turnout position because of their hip joint orientation. Maybe their hip sockets face outwards. So parallel for them like so isn't great, or even this position doesn't work for their hip joints. It's much more comfortable to actually stand like that, right? So we need to be able to give people their freedom of going, this is mountain pose, stand in this position, figure out what works best for you, but rather than going feet straight, know that for some people with their hip joints or the top of the head of the femur, we're all structured differently, and it's going to have different representations, which is really, it's very interesting, but quite confusing if you're a yoga teacher to not get stuck on alignment here. So whatever position they're in, however, right, even if they're starting like this, you can guide them into energetic feelings of the legs. So you could push down, right, and rise up, or again, like with the feet, you can feel yourself pulling upwards. You can work into abduction, these are our abductors, by pulling the floor apart widthways. So I'm feeling my abductors working, or you can adduct, try and pull the floor together. You guys aren't seeing my legs change, but I'm working like crazy on the inside of my thighs and the inner part of my feet to try and pull the mat in. There's a lot of work here, pulling apart, pulling in, just from Tadasana. I love using clocks because hopefully everyone can read the clock, and sometimes it makes sense. So if you're standing here and your toes are looking at 12 o'clock, obviously you're going to have one clock going one way, one clock face going the other way. And I always say, or discs, and I say turn the right disc clockwise, turn the left disc counterclockwise, but the feet aren't going to move. And then you get this lateral rotation of the hips. And that helps for poses such as Warrior 2, lateral rotation. My feet aren't moving, but I can still work that engagement. So that's a great place to start getting people to tune in. So lateral rotation outwards or inward rotation. So you could use clocks, you could just use discs and try to get them to feel that there and apply those principles or those active movements within other poses. So let's say even pyramid, front leg forward, back leg back, hinging down. Come at you this way so you can see. My feet are forward, my feet are parallel, my feet aren't going to move, but I'm going to push down into the floor and turn my discs outwards. Can you guys see a slight rotation in the hips? It's made the pose so much more intense, but lots of activity and around, especially in around the musculature around my knee joint, right? And again, if you're a hypermobile client and someone said, don't lock the knee, if you're engaging the muscles and you're pulling the knee into a locked knee state, so be it. I'm active, I'm not just relaxed and letting it pop back. So if you're a hypermobile client, maybe you start in bent, you get them to activate, and then you get them to work back into their range, or everybody, right? The whole class, if it's a group setting. So just looking at Natalie and the questions that she was asking for things to do, like a little warm-up. I think that's a great warm-up. Also bending and stretching. Yeah, drawing up, bending, little movement through the knees. And then you can also do, of course, your risers, or you can play around with different positions. You can play around with rises with knees bent, all sorts of things based on your Tadasana, which follows through if you're doing a practice of rises with warriors, etc. So Natalie, I hope that makes sense when you watch this. Do let me know. You can have so much fun in Tadasana, preparing for the rest of the poses there. All right, so Steph asked, should people have the perfect proportion in poses? She's also wanted some modifications for cow face pose, which I'll go through. And I love this one, what to do when people just do their own thing in class, the freestylers. Have you guys had them in your classes? Yeah? Someone goes rogue on the mat. You're just looking at them, you're like, that is not what I was talking about, but that's okay. I've had plenty of freestylers in my classes. And the best thing that you can do is make kind of a bit of a light out of it. You know, you could be teaching, you'd be like, you know, we're going to be coming into, you know, we're in Warrior 1, you know, but if you want to freestyle and do Warrior, do extended side angle, that's absolutely fine. But just note, when you're ready to come back to Warrior 2, we're all here. Like, it could be a bit of a tongue in cheek, but not to completely call them out. But, you know, or afterwards just say, hey, I noticed that during the session you were doing a lot of your own stuff. Are you, you know, would you mind giving me some feedback? Is it interesting enough for you? Or do you just generally, you know, would you just like to do your own thing? I know I've been in the yoga class before, many. I usually go to the back of the mat if I get a chance to do another teacher's, and I'm on the back of the mat most of the time, just might as well just like have a dummy in my mouth. I'm just in bliss, rolling around, like just happy to be on a mat being told what to do. And sometimes the teacher will come around and be like, are you okay, Stella? Are you fine? And I realize I'm also freestyling. I'm just doing my own thing, but I'm so loving being there. So this person, Steph, might also just absolutely love and adore your class, but she just loves to freestyle. And if it is off-putting to the other students around you, then maybe ask her in a really nice way. Just go, you know, like, I was just wondering, because you're not doing some of the poses, is everything going all right with the practice? You know, is there any feedback that you'd like to give me? Because then you've kind of put it on her to start talking. That's my my advice for that one. And should people be in perfect proportion in poses? No, we're so different. I've got a really cool, I want to show you guys. Where are we? My desktop. They're Olympians, but check this out. These are female Olympic athletes. And yes, they're all got athletes' bodies, but they haven't been changed. This is everyone up against each other, right? And how different, how absolutely different we all are. The next, obviously, game would be guess the sport, but it is actually written down below. I think I've got another one, another picture. Hang on. Let's get back. The next picture as well. So different. It's so varied, right? It's insane. And this also is what will happen in a typical, you know, a typical class. If you think about when you do your teacher trainings, most of us are pretty good and seasoned yogis already. We're familiar with it. We learn together. It's quite easy. But when you go out and teach bodies, it's a whole nother ball game. Like different shapes, different sizes. You're probably dealing with, you know, 20 different hip varieties, 20 different shoulder varieties internally, right? You know, Mark, you've got pathologies like stents in the heart, etc. Like there's different things. So it's the poses themselves are going to look quite different. The best that we can do, I think, as teachers and instructors is, especially in yoga, because you are forming a shape, right? You're forming a certain shape. This is the Warrior 2 shape that I want you guys to get into, but please do play around with your stance, or maybe already tell them, hey, just do you guys know in your warm up, maybe in your Tadasana, when you're doing some drills, do you guys know how differently shaped our hips are? So some of us might, you know, be gymnasts and ballerinas who could get into the middle split. Some of us will never be able to do it, but they'll have really sturdy hips. There's disadvantages and advantages to everything. If they kind of know that, maybe that, you know, it lowers their high expectations of having to nail a certain aesthetic in a pose. And for us as teachers to be like, oh, well, the knee needs to be tracking that way. But maybe for them it can't, right? So rather than, you know, letting everyone go rogue in a class though, and you going, well, I don't know what now to teach, just give them the shape, you know, say, give them the visual. This is warrior 2. This is around about what I want you to get into. Please get into it and start to move around and feel out what feels the best in your joints and do the best job that you can to feel it out. And then you can start to fine tune it if you want, especially if it's a private client. But that's usually what I say at the beginning of my sessions. Or if I see people struggling or looking to the person next to them, or they are like, they come up and ask you, or can you check my alignment? Can you put me in the right position? The position that I was taught in my yoga school might not be the right position to put that person in. Does that make sense? It might not be that beneficial for them. So it does take away, you know, the restraints of having a dogmatic practice, but then it also kind of opens up a big can of worms because it makes it feel a bit tricky, because it's quite nice to follow some guidelines and some rules, right? But unfortunately, that's just the way we all are. And I think it's a much better way to teach, to give people a bit more freedom and for you to not have to stress so much about everyone being in perfect alignment. It's really good. Okay. Modifications for cow face pose. Since I've got the 4 of you guys on screen, how are your cow face poses feeling, going, and how do you ever teach this to your clients? Which is this one, usually combined with the arms, perhaps sometimes combined with that. Do you guys ever do that one much? No? No from Jody? Karen? Mark? Judith, you could just, you guys are on, I made it look easy. Yeah, but I only demonstrate one. Nailed it. I don't have to linger in that pose. Yeah, so for some people, it's, yeah, no, go for it, please. Please chat away, guys, if you have anything to say.
So I struggle to get in that one myself, but I do teach it.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether it's off-putting because I can't get in it myself properly. So I'm a bit, confused with that one.
What do you feel your
Sorry, I didn't get that, Stella.
What do you feel your restrictions are?
So my hips, I can't get my knees over, and I have to go on my hands, and lift my bottom up, and then put a block down to come back onto it to bring my knees together. So it feels a little bit like complicated, if you like, maybe for someone that's never done it before.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so thanks for that. And that goes 100% this one back to the position with how different our hips are. So some people, these are our pelvic bones, right? Our hip joints are actually in here, and you know that with the big pelvic bones, they usually have the hip socket and the head of the femur goes into the hip socket. Some of our hip sockets are shaped quite outwards. Some are shaped more facing kind of inwards. Some are really, really deep, and the thigh bone goes deep into that socket and moves around congruently. Those more flexy, bendy ballerina gymnasts, or even those yogis, they have a much shallower socket, and there's way more mobility around the hip joint. And when we're looking at a pose such as cow face, and it's like, okay, well, what is happening? What is happening in the hip joint? What are the joint actions? So it's from a simple prosthetic, you're adducting, you're taking the hip across the midline, but also the other hip down the bottom is also across the midline, because it's always that squeezing to center, right? So you're feeling quite a lot of compression in the hips and adduction of the inner thighs. Now this goes against what the glute max, the butt muscle, does, right? Its action is to do hip extension, external rotation, and sometimes a little bit of, try to do it from this way, hip extension, lateral rotation, and abduction. So if you were someone who had quite tight glutes and you went into here, you might also be inhibited with the tissues, right? If you had a tight glutes. But if structurally your hips are just not that way inclined, if you're someone with hip joints that maybe the actual joint itself faces more outwards, to get your thigh bone to turn all that way around here, that's a huge feat. That's like way end of the other spectrum of the range of motion. And it might just be really hard to do that, and then also bend the knees and get the other leg to squeeze up against it. So we need to take that into account too. So how do we get into it and figure out what our capacity is? I love a really wise progression. I love, like, if you thought that you might be building up to this, or just giving people that sense of being able to achieve, if you know that this is a tricky one. If you were throwing it in and you got to it and then you decided, oh, I really want to do this pose, and you hadn't maybe built it up in the practice, that's okay. You can always, as a quick, easy fix, is get on a bolster. And as we all know, with blocks and bolsters, it lifts you up. It doesn't have to be a bolster, it could be a block, but it's already lifted me up, and it's made it much more easy, especially for that top leg. No, I'm not in that tiny pretzel position, but that doesn't mean that from here I can't do that. All I have to do now is squeeze actively. My legs aren't on the floor, but I'm getting the same benefit from this pose. Does that make sense? That's probably the position that I settle into on the bolster elevated. But that is my cow face pose. This is cow face, isn't it? I'm doing the right one. Or is this shoelace? This is cow face. This is the right one. I'm pretty sure. Yes, this one. And I think it's got two names. And then so from here, I'm activating, guys. I'm pushing my bottom knee and top knee against each other. And I'm activating my inner thighs. This is another one. Karen, if you were doing this with your lady, your hypermobile lady, rather than her just flopping over it, right? Get her to squeeze and get her to work the tissues before she relaxes over them. She might be on the ground for sure, right? But a good squeeze and get her to hold that. So that, by me squeezing actively into my inner thighs, has already given me a hip stretch, because it's the agonist muscles are my adductors, and the antagonist muscles are my abductors over here. And also the glute is getting a little bit of a stretch. But some people might not be able to get into that position either. So as a quick little rundown, if you were going to plan this as opposed to get into at the end or give people steps to figure out where they're at in their practice, starting from standing is great. It's much more accessible. Maybe someone might need a balance, let's say Karen, your osteoporosis client, fantastic balance poses, by the way, I forgot to mention, the best thing for them. But maybe she's got a chair, right? She's holding on to something if she can't stabilize. Everyone else, glute stretch to start off with. Pushing the thigh away from the torso actually stretches the butt rather than pulling it closer. Glute stretch like that to start off. Then that feeds into your eagle bind, right? And now you're only having to worry about one hip being stretched. Some of us won't be able to get the foot behind, and that's okay. All you need to do is cue, squeeze together, and that's good enough for me. That's even way more. I'm getting way more activation from squeezing inward than just hooking and it being passive. So that shouldn't be a limitation, but you just see where people are and get them to work that. That's stretching my tissues here, preparing this hip. You do both sides. So for a lot of people, that's going to be tricky enough, and you might see people are so tight that they're here, right? And in standing, they're here. So you know that for sure when they get down to the floor, it's not going to be an easy feat to get into this pose. So another way that you could also prepare, lying on your back is quite nice. And you can do the same pose, strap. So crossing the legs over, just loosely, and I'm going to place the strap around the arches of my feet and lie on the back, nice and easy. And then I'm going to try and keep the strap connected and work my legs into a crossed position. You guys see that? So I've kind of come into it loose, feel out where I am, and then try and figure out the position. Can I get that bind happening? Because people can actually feel out what the bind feels like. And then I can pull, I can push, I can pull, I can push. It's a nice one to get people to feel out the cross action. It's quite a lovely stretch. I know exactly where my back is in space. You could also make that more active, and you could play around with, hey, even working this with your arms if you want. It's not the actual pose we're talking about, but the nice little reclined prep pose to prepare for the upright version. Then building your clients into upright, stretching the hip even further, a half rocking, half baby, encouraging crossing the midline. So encouraging the action of taking the hip and thigh that way. So that's adduction. So that's going to stretch into here. which is your abductors. Rather than hanging out to the side, that's not our shoelace pose. Our shoelace pose is crossed. Once you've done both of those, then you could say to them, you know, how does even that feel, the twist? Is that manageable? How does that feel, the twist? All right, let's make this a little bit more active. Pushing the hips, pushing the feet forward and squeezing. Now with this pose, ideally both butt cheeks are on the floor. That's not happening. Of course, you can prop them up. Some people here may complain of knee pain, but maybe they're not being as active in the knee joints like I mentioned. Squeeze together, do your arm thing, come forward and aim to try and get your hips, your butt cheeks level. So those are little progressions. I like the bolster because it's quite soft and cushy, and then you can move your butt cheeks around as opposed to the block. If you have access to a bolster, that's great. Those are just progressions or regressions, if you will, but I like to say progressions of how you could plan a class around getting into that pose and making it feel achievable, because it can always be, you know, you start from step 1 and you're like, how does that feel? Or step 2, does that, you know, can you get into that? You're coming down. There's always something that they can go back to. So if you hit the end cow face pose and it's still too challenging, you'd be like, if you can't do it, no problem, just go back to that previous step, figure out what is there for you, rather than sometimes jumping into the big kahuna first and going, oh no, you can't do it, so let me just backtrack. It's quite a nice way to plan a class, and it gets you thinking critically about the actual position and how you could break it down and use all the other poses. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, no, I'm going to sign off too. Thank you so much, and I'll get back to you on your question. Thank you for that. Lovely to meet you. Yeah, does that make sense, guys, with that progression? I know I did that very quickly. That was one of Steph's queries. So Karen, I would love your feedback as just to, you know, think about slowly going into it. If that's something that you struggle with, start from standing where it's more accessible, stretching the glutes, come down, play around with cushions, play around with bolsters, play around on your back, feeling out the cow face position there, and then see if it can become more easeful. Yeah, that's my one for that one. I think, guys, I've managed to cover it, which is good. I hope. Is there anything that awesome, you guys, and I'm gonna shush and I'm gonna ask you guys to speak. Is there anything else that you have to add or would like to discuss?
I would just, when you said that about the cow face pose, and then just do your arm things.
Mm-hmm.
Which is it right in cow face? If you don't actually do the archer's arms, just hold on to the elbows, because it's not so easy for everybody to actually do the archer's arms.
Not so. Sorry, you'll have to repeat, Judith. It's not so easy for everyone to do which part?
The archer's arms behind your back.
Oh, so yeah, and then the arms. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's really tricky, right? So here's the thing. I build it up. I separate the two. I start with a practice, you know, hero's pose if they're able to. And I usually start them just doing drills like this. It's great anyway for the shoulders, you know, because some people might be really tight and it's quite hard. And it's actively moving. It's great for the shoulders. It's working external rotation, internal rotation. And then from there, I get different reaches, pull in, different reaches, just letting you guys know there's so many things that you can do. It feels good on the shoulders, warms people up. So I've separated this completely. And then I would be here, whether you're holding on to a strap or you're just getting them to actively reach, that's absolutely fine as well. You don't have to be holding onto a strap and being here. Notice the position of my shoulders. It's better to loosen the strap or loosen the grip and have that feeling of broadness across the chest. And then from here, once they've got the position and that's feeling pretty good, then I would cue, you know, move into flexion, see how that feels. So that's the upper body covered. That could be part one, right? And then you do a vinyasa sequence, etc. And then you bring in part two, which was starting from eagle, starting from glute stretch, standing, eagle, coming down. Try a cow face. Here's the thing, actually, guys. You know, with sometimes the peak poses, we might get to it. We've built up so much, and then we try it, and then it all feels like it's all over so quickly. Like maybe we're so tired that we end up just doing 1 or 2. Why not weave that peak pose in like every two or three poses, right? You're like, we're going to start with it. How awkward does it feel right now? Let's build on that. Then you go back and you do some other things, and then you try it again. And then you go and do some more poses, and then you go back and you try it again. So by the end of the session, your students have had the ability to try cow face, whether it's with the arms 6 times, right? 5 or 6 times throughout the session. And they can see that there's somehow this progression. So by the last one that they do, they can have a sense of achievement. I sometimes had, like in my previous teaching in yoga, had forgotten to do that. I was like, it's about the journey and getting there. And then it seemed like I was rushing these wonderful, glorious, achieving poses at the end, which they work so hard for. But there's no reason that after a gentle, adequate warm up, you can't put them into these poses to begin with and go, how does this feel? This is what we're going to be building up to. We're going to move through the joints. We're going to move through some poses and just keep coming back to it. I think this is quite a nice one to do with this pose, because you might find that the students or yourselves loosen up, and it feels pretty rewarding when you can measure something from something you've done at the beginning to how it feels by the end. Something to play with anyway, and with anything that you're programming in. So Judith, for that, like I was saying, you could, do the cow face and get people to feel it out. They might feel very awkward, and have a bit of light and a play with that. Be like, okay, let's break it down. Let's do the arms. Let's do a vinyasa. Let's do the hips, and then let's bring it back together. So that's a nice way of looking at it. If that helps for you guys to layer it for the pose, so people don't get terrified when they're going into their pretzel position, like, I can't do this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that help, Judith? Does that make sense?
Yep, yeah, does. Thank you.
Cool. And I know, guys, I extrapolate the poses and break them down a little bit, but sometimes it's just nice to do that, to look at them that way. There's no reason why you also can't just go, we're doing this pose, this pose, this pose, and you build on that, you build on the strength, and you just get better and better at it. Yeah. All right, guys. So thank you so much, and thank you for your patience at the very beginning with the technological issues. Sorry to eat into your Sunday morning. It was a pleasure to meet you guys and chat with you. I hope that has been helpful, and you have something to play with for the week with your students. And I'd love to hear your feedback as to how it went as well. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. It's always really good to know. I'm always here to ask questions as well, so to follow up on this session. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome, guys. Have a great day, and hopefully see you for one of these soon, if not chatting in between. All right. Bye. Thank you. See you.
Bye. Bye-bye.